Last but not least, we have the immune system. We're going to start by just looking at the anatomy of the immune system, and some of this will be reviewed from chapter 15. The two functions of the immune system are to clear and get rid of anything that doesn't belong in the body, and then also to develop long-term immunity to protect us from getting infected again. Immunity is just defined as the immune system's ability to protect an individual from a disease by recognizing and eliminating the pathogen. A pathogen is just defined as a microorganism that causes disease. There's all kinds of different pathogens. They could be viruses, bacteria, they could be protozoans, they might be fungi. There's all kinds of pathogens that are out there. The immune system components include the physical barriers, which are the skin and mucous membranes, the leukocytes or white blood cells, and also the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is needed for two things. It's needed to produce the white blood cells, and second, it's needed as a place for the white blood cells to hang out and look for any invaders. Let's take a look at the white blood cells first. The neutrophils are the most common of the white blood cells in the blood, and their big job is they're phagocytes. So they will eat anything that doesn't belong, any bacteria they find, dirt, dead cell parts, anything like that they will eat. They're also one of the first white blood cells to arrive at the site of an injury, and they do secrete some cytokines or chemical messengers that are also involved in inflammation. They're called neutrophils because their granules that they contain are kind of a neutral staining color, so they really don't stain red and they don't really stain blue. The eosinophils are another one of our granulocytes. Their granules stain red, and their big job is to defend against parasites, so for example intestinal worms. They're also involved in allergies, they go in and kind of clean up some of the mess. They are phagocytic, but that's not their main job. This picture shows how eosinophils kill intestinal worms. The worms become coated with a type of antibody called IgE antibodies, which we'll talk about later. And the eosinophils will bind to those antibodies, which stimulates them to release their granule contents. And the granules contain a lot of nasty chemicals which poke holes in the worm, and then water will rush in and the worm will explode and then it's gone. Basophils are another type of granulocyte, and their granules stain blue. They defend against parasites, and they're also very involved in inflammation and allergic reactions. Their granules contain the chemical histamine, which causes the signs of inflammation and allergic reactions. Monocytes are phagocytes, and when they're in the blood, they're called monocytes, but when they migrate into the tissues, they become macrophages. The macrophages can either be free or wandering macrophages or fixed macrophages. The free or wandering macrophages, the name says what they do. They kind of wander around the body looking for things to eat. And then the fixed macrophages, they stay in one body area and they don't tend to wander around. So remember when we learned about the alveolar macrophages? They just stay in the alveoli in the lungs and they don't go other places. There are three types of lymphocytes: B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, and natural killer cells. And with the T lymphocytes, there are three main kinds. There's cytotoxic T cells, helper T cells, and regulatory T cells. The B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes are very specific, and they will only recognize one pathogen that they will go after. And if it's not their match, they don't react to it. So we have millions and millions of different B and T lymphocytes, each recognizing a different pathogen. When a B lymphocyte recognizes its specific pathogen, it will start dividing and produce plasma cells. And plasma cells produce antibodies. Antibodies are made of proteins, and they're also called immunoglobulins or gamma globulins. And antibodies will bind to any pathogens that are in the body fluids. And the antibodies act like big red flags that tell the other white blood cells to come over and get rid of that pathogen. The cytotoxic T lymphocytes work differently. They're going to directly contact an infected cell, cancer cell, or transplanted cell and kill it. And then the last two types of white blood cells are only found in the tissues. They're not in the blood. So we have mast cells that look very similar to basophils, and they have blue staining granules that also contain histamine. They're going to be involved in inflammation and allergies. And then dendritic cells are similar to macrophages. So they're also phagocytes, and they're also antigen presenting cells. So whatever they've eaten, they will present a piece of that to the helper T cells to see if anyone recognizes what they found. The reason they're called dendritic cells is because they have these long processes that stick out, and scientists thought they look like the dendrites on neurons, and that's how they got their name. As far as producing all of these white blood cells, they're all going to be produced in the red bone marrow from the hematopoietic stem cells. And remember, these stem cells also produce the red blood cells, platelets, along with all of the types of the white blood cells. The lymphatic system has a couple of different functions. It's an important part of the immune system. It also drains the excess fluid filtered out of the capillaries into the tissues and returns it to the circulation. And it also transports lipids that were absorbed from the GI tract. So remember, those lipids get packaged up as chylomicrons, those big lipoproteins. They're too big to fit in the capillaries, so they enter into the lacteals and then get transported by the lymphatic system into the blood. The lymphatic system is divided into central and peripheral lymphoid tissues. I'm not going to ask you which one belongs where, but the central lymphoid tissues, the bone marrow and the thymus, that's where you're going to be making the white blood cells in the bone marrow, and this is also where most of the white blood cells will mature, is in the bone marrow. And then the thymus, right above the heart, that's where the T lymphocytes will mature. And then the peripheral lymphoid tissues, there's quite a few of them here. That's where the white blood cells will hang out and look for invaders. So the central lymphoid tissues, this is where we're going to be producing our white blood cells, and this is where they mature. So our red bone marrow is going to produce all of the white blood cells from the hematopoietic stem cells, and all the white blood cells except for the T lymphocytes will mature here. And the thymus, just above the heart, is where the T lymphocytes mature, and that's how they got their name, T lymphocytes. The T refers to thymus. And then the peripheral lymphoid tissues include things like the spleen, lymph nodes, tonsils, appendix. And this is where the white blood cells will hang out and look for any invaders. So the spleen is going to be filtering the blood, looking for invaders there. The lymph nodes are going to be looking at the fluid draining from the tissues. Tonsils are going to be trapping any inhaled or ingested pathogens. And then the appendix and Peyer's patches in the ileum wall will look for any pathogens that are in your GI tract. And this is just a picture of a lymph node. So the lymphatic vessel coming in will be bringing in the fluid draining from the tissue. It will percolate through that lymph node, and there's a lot of white blood cells hanging out here looking for any invaders. And then the fluid will drain out through the lymphatic vessel on the other side. And if the white blood cells find something concerning, they can just migrate up those lymphatic vessels and find their way to where the infection is.